You don't feel broken. You still wake up on time. You answer messages. You show up to work. You laugh when you're supposed to. From the outside, you look fine. But somewhere in the quiet moments in the elevator mirror in the car before you turn the key at 1:37 a.m. with your phone lighting up your face, something feels off. Not dramatic, not tragic, just flat. And you can't explain it. You're not deeply sad. You're not in crisis. You're just tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. And the strangest part, you've started to think this is normal. You tell yourself, this is just adulthood. This is just responsibility. This is just how life feels after a while. But what if it isn't? What if that quiet emptiness isn't a personality flaw, or a lack of gratitude, or some secret weakness you're too embarrassed to admit? What if it's something you've been trained into? Because modern life doesn't scream when it changes you. It nudges. It distracts. It rewards certain behaviors. It quietly reshapes what feels normal. You didn't wake up one day and decide to feel disconnected. You adapted. You adapted to constant notifications, to comparison disguised as inspiration, to productivity being treated like morality, to busyness being confused with worth. And slowly, without realizing it, you stopped checking in with yourself. Not because you didn't care, but because there was never a pause long enough to notice. So now you move through your days efficiently, you perform competence, you maintain stability. But underneath it all, there's a quiet question you don't say out loud. When did I stop feeling fully alive? And maybe the real question isn't what's wrong with you. Maybe it's this. Who taught you to feel this way? No one sat you down and said, here's how to slowly disconnect from yourself. It didn't happen that way. It happened in smaller ways. In the way your phone became the first thing you touch in the morning. In the way silence started to feel uncomfortable. In the way boredom became something to eliminate instead of explore. Modern life doesn't attack you. It conditions you. It rewards speed. It rewards visibility. It rewards reaction. And the more responsive you become to everything outside of you, the less responsive you become to what's happening inside. You check notifications before you check your own mood. You track steps, calories, productivity metrics, but not meaning. You know how many emails you sent today? You don't know what you actually felt, because feeling takes time. And time in this system is always supposed to be optimized. So you learn to override discomfort. You learn to mute subtle emotions. You learn to keep moving. If something feels off, scroll. Work. Stream something. Refresh. Relief is always one tap away. But so is distraction. And when relief comes, that easily depth starts to feel unnecessary. Why sit with confusion when you can numb it? Why question your direction when you can consume another video about improving yourself? You don't even realize you've replaced reflection with stimulation. You're overstimulated and undernourished. Constant input, minimal integration. You absorb opinions, advice, hot takes, success stories. But you rarely digest any of it long enough to ask, does this actually matter to me? The system trains you to react fast, but never to pause long enough to choose. So your life becomes efficient, polished, functional, and quietly disconnected. Not because you lack depth, but because depth requires stillness. And stillness is the one thing modern life doesn't know how to reward. And this is where it becomes subtle. Because nothing about your life looks catastrophic. You're not spiraling. You're not collapsing. You're just consistently occupied. Modern life trains you through repetition, small exposures, daily rhythms, invisible expectations. It doesn't force emptiness on you. It replaces depth with stimulation, so gradually you don't notice the exchange. Think about how your day begins. Before your mind even fully wakes up, you're already somewhere else. Emails, messages, headlines, someone else's urgency. Your nervous system doesn't ease into the morning. It spikes. And when your baseline becomes constant alertness, calm starts to feel unfamiliar. This is the first mechanism, endless comparison. You don't just see other people anymore. You see curated peaks, achievements without context, happiness without boredom, confidence without doubt. And even if you tell yourself you don't compare, your nervous system does. It quietly recalibrates what normal should look like. So your stable life begins to feel small. Your steady progress feels slow. Your ordinary joy feels insufficient. Not because it is, but because your reference point has been distorted. Comparison doesn't make you hate your life. It makes you question it. And questioning your own reality long enough creates distance from it. Distance becomes numbness. The second mechanism is more praised. Productivity worship. You've learned that being busy is virtuous. If you're tired, it must mean you're trying. If your calendar is full, you must be important. Rest feels indulgent. Slowing down feels irresponsible. So you optimize. Morning routines, side projects, fitness goals, networking, skill stacking. And none of that is wrong. But when your worth becomes tied to output, you stop asking whether the output is aligned. You become efficient at climbing. You forget to ask if it's your mountain. So even when you succeed, it feels hollow. Because achievement without alignment feels like winning someone else's game. And modern life celebrates visible success, not internal coherence. The third mechanism is more neurological. Dopamine fragmentation. Your attention is constantly sliced. Short clips, quick takes, rapid rewards. Your brain adapts. Long-form thinking feels heavy. Deep focus feels exhausting. Stillness feels like withdrawal. You start needing noise to feel okay. Music while working, a podcast while walking, a show while eating, scrolling while resting. Silence becomes threatening. But silence is where self-awareness lives. When you never sit in silence long enough, you don't lose intelligence. You lose intimacy with your own mind. And without intimacy, you start feeling like a stranger to yourself. That's the quiet emptiness. Not dramatic despair, just unfamiliarity. The fourth mechanism is the most socially reinforced. Emotional avoidance culture. We don't say it directly, but we imply it everywhere. Stay positive, be grateful, keep going, don't dwell. So when something uncomfortable rises in you, confusion, envy, loneliness, resentment, you label it unproductive. You push it aside. You distract. Because in a fast-moving world, pausing to feel deeply can look like falling behind. So you become emotionally efficient. You process just enough to function, but not enough to integrate. And emotions that aren't integrated don't disappear. They flatten. And when too many emotions are flattened, life starts feeling flat too. This is how modern life trains emptiness, not through trauma, through normalization. Normalization of speed, normalization of comparison, normalization of fragmentation, normalization of distraction. You didn't choose to disconnect. You adapted to survive the pace, but adaptation has a cost. When you're constantly reacting to what's outside you, you stop responding to what's inside you. You stop noticing what excites you, what drains you, what aligns, what doesn't. You become good at managing impressions, but distant from your own experience. And here's the most dangerous part. It all feels functional. You're stable, you're competent, you're socially acceptable, so no one intervenes. Not your friends, not your coworkers, not even you, because nothing appears broken. But something is quietly dimming. You start mistaking stimulation for meaning, mistaking activity for aliveness, mistaking progress for purpose. And when that confusion goes unchecked, you begin chasing intensity instead of depth. More goals, more upgrades, more content, more noise, hoping something will make you feel again. But intensity fades quickly. Depth doesn't. And depth requires something. Modern life rarely gives you permission to have. Space. Space without performance. Space without metrics. Space without comparison. Space where nothing is being optimized. That space is where you start hearing yourself again. But if you've been trained long enough to avoid that space, you might not even know it's missing. You just know something feels slightly off. Like you're living next to your life instead of inside it. You show up, you perform, you deliver, but you don't fully inhabit. And that's the quiet tragedy. Because the system doesn't need you to feel fulfilled. It only needs you to keep functioning. So it rewards what keeps you moving. And slowly, you begin rewarding yourself for the same thing. More doing, less being. Until one day you look around at everything you've built and feel strangely untouched by it. Not because you failed, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what actually matters to you. And when you stop asking that question long enough, emptiness doesn't feel like a warning anymore. It feels like personality. It feels like adulthood. It feels like reality. But maybe it's conditioning. But here's where the story shifts. Because if modern life trained you into this quiet emptiness, then what you're feeling isn't proof that you're broken. It's proof that you adapted. And adaptation is intelligent. You learned how to survive stimulation, how to perform under pressure, how to stay relevant in a fast-moving world. That's not weakness. That's skill. The problem is not that you adapted. The problem is that you never stopped adapting long enough to ask, at what cost? Somewhere along the way, survival mode became baseline. Not dramatic survival, not fight or flight panic, just low-grade vigilance. Always checking, always scanning, always preparing. Your body rarely feels fully at rest. Your mind rarely feels fully still. Even when you're lying down, there's something running in the background. And when your nervous system lives in constant low-level activation, subtle joy becomes harder to access. Because joy is quiet. It doesn't shout over noise. It doesn't compete with notifications. It shows up in small moments. A slow morning, a real conversation, a creative flow, a walk without headphones. But if you've trained yourself to avoid stillness, you miss those moments. Not because they aren't there, but because your attention is elsewhere. And attention is where life actually happens. Modern life pulls your attention outward, toward metrics, toward opinions, toward performance. But meaning is built inward, through integration, through reflection, through noticing patterns in your own experience. When attention is constantly external, identity becomes unstable. You start defining yourself by roles, your job title, your productivity level, your social persona, your achievements. And roles are useful, but they aren't the same as identity. Roles can change. Identity needs grounding. If you never pause long enough to feel what's consistent beneath the roles, you begin to feel replaceable in your own life. Like if everything stopped tomorrow, you wouldn't know who you are without the structure. That's not emptiness. That's disconnection from your internal reference point. And the more you rely on external structure for stability, the more fragile your sense of self becomes. So you double down, more goals, more plans, more future orientation. Because planning feels safe. The future feels controllable. But meaning doesn't live in the future. It lives in alignment. And alignment can only be felt in the present. This is the paradox modern life creates. You are constantly encouraged to improve your life, but rarely invited to experience it. You are taught how to build a resume, not how to build resonance. You are taught how to optimize performance, not how to cultivate presence. And without presence, even success feels distant. Have you ever achieved something you worked hard for, only to feel the satisfaction fade almost immediately? That's not ingratitude. That's dopamine misalignment. You've trained your brain to anticipate the reward more than inhabit it. So the chase feels stimulating. The arrival feels quiet, and quiet feels unfamiliar. So you chase again. This is how emptiness sustains itself. Not through failure, through endless pursuit. You start believing the next milestone will fix the feeling. The next raise, the next move, the next relationship, the next version of you. And growth is important. But when growth becomes an escape from stillness, you never actually meet yourself where you are. You just keep editing your life like a highlight reel. But here's something uncomfortable. What if the emptiness isn't a void? What if it's a signal? A signal that your nervous system is overloaded. A signal that your attention is fragmented. A signal that your identity is overextended into roles and underrooted in self-awareness. What if nothing is wrong with you? You're just overstimulated and under-reflective. Over-connected and under-present, over-informed and under-integrated. You don't need more input. You need digestion. You don't need more goals. You need clarity. You don't need to reinvent yourself. You need to reconnect. And reconnection doesn't look dramatic. It looks small, unimpressive, almost invisible. 5 minutes without your phone, a walk without consuming anything, sitting with a feeling without labeling it, writing something no one will read, letting a question linger without rushing to Google. That kind of space feels uncomfortable at first, because your brain expects stimulation. But discomfort in stillness is not emptiness. It's withdrawal from distraction. There's a difference. And if you stay with that discomfort long enough, something shifts. You start noticing your own thoughts again, not the borrowed ones, not the algorithm-fed ones. Yours. You start recognizing what actually energizes you, instead of what impresses others. You begin distinguishing between exhaustion from effort, and exhaustion from misalignment. That distinction changes everything, because effort can be meaningful. Misalignment is draining. Modern life trains you to measure effort. It doesn't train you to measure alignment. So you might be working hard, but not in a direction that resonates. And that's why the emptiness persists. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack gratitude, but because your internal compass hasn't been consulted in a while. And when a compass is ignored long enough, you stop trusting it. You assume you don't have one. But you do. It's just quiet. quieter than notifications, quieter than ambition, quieter than comparison, which means, if you want to hear it, you have to reduce the noise, not eliminate modern life, not escape society, but create boundaries around your attention, because attention is your most valuable resource. Where it goes, your sense of self follows. If your attention lives in other people's lives, you'll feel absent from your own. If your attention lives in endless future scenarios, the present will feel thin. But if your attention slowly returns to your direct experience, the flatness starts to soften. Not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually. You start feeling texture again, curiosity, subtle excitement, even grief. And grief is not the enemy. Grief often means you're reconnecting to something real, because real life has weight. Emptiness feels weightless, and weightless things drift. Maybe you haven't been empty. Maybe you've been drifting. Drifting between stimuli, drifting between expectations, drifting between versions of yourself designed to fit environments. But drifting can stop the moment you choose to anchor your attention, not in achievement, not in comparison, but in awareness. And awareness doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. And presence is something no system can train out of you completely. It's still there, waiting for space. So maybe the real danger was never emptiness. It was normalization, getting so used to feeling slightly disconnected that you stopped questioning it, calling it maturity, calling it responsibility, calling it just how life is. But numbness isn't wisdom, and constant busyness isn't purpose. You were trained to keep moving, not to keep noticing. And noticing is where aliveness returns. Not in a dramatic breakthrough, not in quitting your job tomorrow, not in deleting every app overnight, but in small acts of reclamation, choosing to sit with a thought instead of escaping it, choosing depth over speed, choosing alignment over applause. You don't need to reject modern life. You need to stop letting it define your inner one, because the world will always compete for your attention. But it cannot decide what you value unless you never pause long enough to ask. The emptiness you feel, it might actually be space. Space that's been neglected. Space that's been filled with noise for so long, it forgot how to echo. And when you begin protecting your attention even slightly, you start feeling texture again. A moment of clarity. A sharper emotional response. A subtle sense of direction. Not loud, but real. And real feels different. Real doesn't spike. It steadies. It doesn't overwhelm. It roots. You may not suddenly feel euphoric, but you might feel present. And presence is heavier than emptiness. It has gravity. It anchors you back into your own experience. Modern life trained you to respond constantly, but you were not built to live in reaction. You were built to choose, and choice requires awareness. So the next time that quiet flatness shows up, don't immediately label it as something broken. Ask what it's pointing to. Is it fatigue? Overstimulation, misalignment, unfelt emotion? Not every uncomfortable feeling is a flaw. Some are invitations. Invitations to slow down enough to remember who you are without the noise. Because the scariest emptiness isn't feeling nothing. It's getting used to feeling nothing and never wondering why. You were never meant to live slightly disconnected from yourself. You were never meant to measure your worth by output alone. You were never meant to consume more than you reflect. And maybe you're not empty. You're just overdue for silence, for stillness, for space wide enough to hear your own thoughts again. Modern life may have trained you to drift, but it never took away your ability to return. And returning doesn't require perfection, just attention. Because where your attention rests, your life begins to feel real again. And here's something even deeper. If modern life trained you into this state slowly, then you won't fix it quickly. And that's okay. Because this was never about fixing. It was about remembering. Remembering what it feels like to experience a moment without performing it. Remembering what it feels like to choose something not because it's efficient, but because it resonates. Modern life rewards visibility, but meaning grows in invisibility. The most important shifts in your life will not be posted. They won't be optimized. They won't even look impressive. They will look like turning your phone face down during dinner, letting a conversation breathe without checking the time, walking without documenting it, saying no to something that drains you, even if it looks good on paper. These are not dramatic acts, but they retrain your nervous system. They teach it that you are not constantly under evaluation, that you don't have to earn rest, that your worth is not a performance metric. And slowly, When your nervous system feels safer, your inner life becomes clearer. Because clarity doesn't come from force, it comes from safety. When you stop chasing stimulation for a moment, you start noticing subtler signals, a thought that keeps returning, an interest you abandoned, a resentment you never processed, a longing you dismissed as unrealistic. These aren't random. They're fragments of you, fragments that were drowned out by speed. Modern life doesn't destroy identity. It fragments it into roles, into tasks, into expectations. Reconnection is integration, bringing those fragments back into one coherent self. And integration feels heavier at first, because you feel more, not just inspiration, but grief. Grief for time spent chasing things that didn't align, grief for versions of yourself you edited to fit, grief for how long you ignored your own signals. That grief is not regression, it's re-entry. You are stepping back into yourself. And stepping back in always feels more intense than drifting outside. But intensity is not the same as instability. It's aliveness. The kind that doesn't depend on applause. The kind that doesn't spike and crash. The kind that stays. Modern life taught you to fill every gap. But gaps are not the enemy. Gaps are where meaning condenses. When you protect small pockets of space consistently, you start trusting your internal compass again. Not because it shouts, but because you finally hear it. And the compass doesn't give you a 5-year plan. It gives you direction, subtle shifts. This matters. This doesn't. Stay, leave, slow down, go deeper. You don't need certainty. You need alignment. And alignment is felt, not calculated. So maybe the real rebellion in modern life is not quitting everything, not escaping to isolation, but refusing to let noise dictate your inner state, refusing to let comparison define your value, refusing to let productivity replace identity. That kind of rebellion is quiet, invisible, but powerful, because the system runs on your constant reaction. When you pause, even briefly, you reclaim agency. And agency is the opposite of emptiness. Emptiness feels like drifting. Agency feels like steering, not aggressively, not perfectly, but consciously. You don't need to overhaul your life tomorrow. You need to guard your attention today, because attention is where conditioning happens. And attention is where freedom begins. Modern life may have trained you to feel slightly disconnected, but it never removed your capacity to reconnect. That capacity is still there, under the noise, under the habits, under the constant input, waiting, not for a dramatic breakthrough, but for a decision to stop living slightly outside yourself and step back in. And maybe this is the part no one tells you. Reconnection won't feel exciting at first. It won't feel like a breakthrough. It won't feel like a motivational surge. It won't even feel productive. It will feel slower, quieter, almost underwhelming, because you've been trained to associate intensity with meaning. But real meaning doesn't spike. It settles. It deepens. It becomes something you can stand on. Modern life trains you to constantly upgrade your external world. Bigger goals, better systems, more visibility, more output. But your inner world doesn't respond to upgrades. It responds to presence. And presence cannot be rushed. You don't achieve alignment. You return to it again and again, through small choices, through protected silence, through honesty with yourself when something feels off. You may still work hard. You may still build. You may still pursue ambition. But now it's different, because you're not chasing to fill a void. You're building from solidity, and that changes the texture of everything. Conversations feel less performative. Success feels less frantic. Rest feels less guilty. You stop asking, how does this look? And start asking, how does this feel? That question alone can reshape a life. Because feeling is feedback, and feedback is guidance. The emptiness you feared was never proof that something inside you died. It was proof that something inside you was being ignored. Ignored long enough to go quiet. But quiet is not gone. Quiet is waiting. Waiting for attention. Waiting for space. Waiting for you to notice that your life is not meant to be lived at arm's length. You were never meant to hover just outside your own experience. You were meant to inhabit it, fully, imperfectly, consciously. Modern life may have trained you to drift, but you are not powerless against drift. You can anchor, not through intensity, not through reinvention, but through awareness. Because the most dangerous emptiness isn't feeling nothing. It's forgetting that you have the ability to feel deeply again. And the moment you remember that, You're no longer empty. You're awake.